Nope. Good morning and good afternoon. I see people are coming in. Welcome to the webinar. And we're going to get started. We're going to give it a minute or two to allow people to show up. Looks like people are filing in. And awesome. Let's just, we will wait just a minute and then we will get started. Welcome everyone. Glad you're here. Awesome. So this is going to be a jam-packed, full information overhaul of everything you need to know about the TCPA in 2022. There's a lot of people who registered for this. A lot of people are signing up. That's great that you all are interested, that you're hungry to understand the regulations. You want to understand what's going on, and we are delighted to help you. And
hi, Tracy. Good to see you too.
Awesome. Definitely feel free to use the chat as we get into this. We're going to definitely try to take as many questions as we can. We have a lot to cover, but we want to prioritize you and your questions. We thank you for taking your time out of your day, your busy day, to be with us, and we want to make sure that your questions are answered. And so, awesome. So I think we're good. We're going to go ahead and get this thing started because a lot of people are here and we got a lot to cover. So good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. My name is Arvell Craig. I'm the Director of Compliance Services here at Contact Center Compliance. And we are here with Mr. Eric Troutman, the czar of TCPA world. And we're going to talk about everything you need to know about the TCPA in 2022. And I've got a few things I want to cover in housekeeping, just so you know what's going on. So every one of you who signed up, we will send you a replay of the recording. That should get to you by tomorrow. So you don't have to wait long. We will make sure everybody gets a copy of what is happening. Number two, as I mentioned, definitely feel free to ask some questions in the chat as you have them. We have a lot to cover, but again, we want to prioritize you and what you want to know. What is next? Can we jump to the slide? So I do want to mention that we do have a compliance summit. I want to make sure that those of you who may have come to our events in the past, we had one in Florida this past December, but this coming July, on July 18th and 19th, we will have another compliance summit, and it would be in Huntington Beach. So if you want to get an invite, if you want early access to it, we don't have anything public on our site yet, but if you can see here, there's a link there. Maybe we can put that into the chat if any of you are eager to want to be first to know what's happening. So we'll put a link in the chat of this link. If you want to sign up to get notified as soon as it goes live, the TCPA Compliance Summit in July. So other than that.
Hey, Arvell, time out.
Yeah.
You just soft sold that. These summits are incredible. You do want to attend. If you saw the December ones, you know how great this is. 2 full days. We do nothing but talk about TCPA. We like really kind of dive in. It's like a big mud bath, and we just smear TCPA all over ourselves for 2 days. And I get to talk for like 8 hours over 2 days. It's the greatest thing for me and for you. It really is. So yeah, you definitely want to attend this thing. It's on the West Coast for once, so be there.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. So I want to make sure we have enough time for you. So I wasn't trying to sell that. I want to sell you right now. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the czar of TCPA world, Mr. Eric Troutman, one of the country's preeminent class action defense attorneys, a nationally recognized TCPA litigation and compliance attorney. So without further ado, Eric, why don't you go ahead and take the stage, the virtual stage, and let us know everything we need to know about the TCPA.
Yeah, well, look, can you believe it's March 15th already, folks? Like, I feel like it was Christmas yesterday, and here we are a quarter of the way through the year. Lots going on in TCPA world. There always is. Let's go to the first slide. First, let's just orient ourselves. Let's remind ourselves of what we already know. The TCPA is the biggest litigation cash cow in the history of our country. It is the single most dangerous consumer protection statute out there. It is the single broadest restriction on constitutionally protected speech in our nation's history, and it has produced more multi-millionaire plaintiffs' lawyers than any other statute. In sum, it is literally the most important statute that probably governs what you do. So that's why you're here. And it just seems to get worse and worse and worse. We know just this year, we've seen the first few cases coming out suggesting that one call might actually constitute up to 6 violations of the statute. So whereas we're used to saying it's a $500 or $1,500 a call penalty, we're actually seeing it could be more like $3,000 to $15,000 per call, depending on how many different sections of the TCPA, of the CFR, the implementing regulations a single call might violate. So, the courts are really continuing, as we've seen in past years, to clamp down on callers. The TCPA remains, just calling it what it is. It is the federal response to the robocall epidemic. It remains the crown jewel of the federal response to that epidemic. And although the Congress has had a chance on multiple occasions to change its approach, it continues to double down on private litigation, private enforcement under the TCPA to prevent unwanted robocalls. And by the way, as you see here at the bottom of the slide, Capital One, excuse me, it's actually Citibank. I don't know what Capital One is there. I love Capital One. They never do anything wrong. Citibank, that's a mistake in the slide. Citibank just got crushed with a wrong number TCPA class certification ruling. It's probably going to be the first 9-figure TCPA settlement in history. Huge deal. We're going to talk about that. So let's go to the next slide. We just kind of are orienting. We know that verdicts in this space have been over $1 billion. We know that there's been jury verdicts of over 900 million, 200 million. We know that there was the largest TCPA in settlement in history, $76 million, just took place 3 months ago. There was just a $38 million settlement 60 days ago. So again, the TCPA post Facebook, I know there was a lot of talk. The TCPA is dead. No one really pays attention to it anymore. You're crazy. In fact, as the Web Recon folks will tell you, there was a 30% increase this year over filings from last year. And this is after Facebook. So the TCPA is going up and the filings are going up. They are not going down. So let's go to the next slide. Look, I have been accused in the past of teasing with questions that I say I'm going to answer. And then I put together the slides and they don't really answer them. So this time I thought, you know what, I'm going to do the tease questions right up front. So I make sure that I answer them. Now, the downside to this approach is that it's not as structured and linear as I like to have my presentations. As you folks know, I'm very linear. But this way, at least I know I'm covering things, okay? I've got more content on all of these things kind of later on in the presentation. But I want to touch each of them very quickly, kind of like a hummingbird, so that I know I've at least addressed the things that I brought you to this presentation with. So first, biggest litigation trends out there. Okay, we're going to talk about this in a lot of detail, but it is click to dial ATDS claims. It is pre-recorded call claims. That's the biggest one, pre-recorded call claims, and DNC claims, right? We're seeing just a ton of claims, frankly, potentially stemming out of lead fraud, maybe, or manufactured lawsuits, depending on how you look at it. But essentially the claim is, hey, look, you called me. I didn't consent. Okay, we've seen that claim 1,000 times. But the twist is that the caller says, yes, you did consent. I have a lead. I have a express written consent document right here that says, in fact, you did call. And then it becomes a question of fact, right? Was that lead valid or was that lead not valid? And we're seeing increasingly courts are letting that issue go to the jury. All right, so we're going to talk about that here in a bit. Big win by my team here at Squire Patton Boggs. Very proud of this. At the state court level, many of you know that there's Article 3 issues that have been raised at the federal court level, arguing that there is no harm being caused by a violation of the TCPA. That will result at times with the statute, with the claims not being enforceable in federal court. But then what happens? Well, many times the claim just ends up in state court. Well, that's terrible. You don't want to litigate in state court. You'd much rather actually be in federal court. Well, for the first time ever, my firm has won a victory in state court that says even in state court, a TCPA violation has to cause harm. Otherwise, the claim cannot proceed. Never happened before. We did it. We brought that to you. It's a huge ruling. It's called Tony versus Advantage. You can read about it, of course, on tcpaworld.com. It should open the door to other firms being able to follow in our footsteps to get these cases thrown out on Article 3. It's really not Article 3 at the state court level. It's just a concrete harm argument at the state court level. get these claims thrown out, not just a federal court, but a state court. And once you're out of state court, well, guess what? There's nowhere else for them to go. It's a huge win. I mean, honestly, it might be the win of the year. So read about that. More broadly, though, remember, ringless voicemails continue to be treated as a regular old voicemail, which, in case you don't know, is a pre-recorded call under the TCPA. What does that mean? Well, it means you can't use those unless you have the express written consent of the called party for marketing purposes, or the express consent of the called party for informational purposes when you're calling a cell phone. Now, hopefully you all know that when you're calling a landline, different set of rules apply. However, after the FCC's ruling from December of 2020, remember, even to a landline for non-marketing purposes, you are limited to just 3 pre-recorded calls without consent to a landline per month. I know I'm just like dropping all this stuff, going very quickly. That's why I usually have slides. That's why we're usually so linear. But I want to answer these questions for you because folks are asking. So I'm just giving you answers now, okay? Then we'll do the content and further breakdown here in a second. Stay with me if you can. What's the FCC up to? Oh my God, they're up to a ton of stuff. Now, in the past, they have, as you know, done a pretty good job of only enforcing the statute. I'm talking about enforcement actions as opposed to regulatory actions now, as opposed to declaratory relief, interpretive rulings, or issues for NPRMs and rolling out regulations. Enforcement actions, the FCC has been pretty good at really only going after the real bad guys. Well, in the last couple of years, they've kind of shifted their focus. You may know this, right? After Chairman Pai stepped down following Trump coming in, there was kind of a shift in terms of the approach, but now we've got Rosen Worcel now as the chairwoman, and the approach is to look at the carriers and to tell the carriers to stop carrying your traffic, right? Based upon reasonable analytics to determine not whether the content of the call is illegal, but to determine whether or not it is unwanted. This is true black box stuff, right? You don't know whether or not your calls are going to be connected, if they're going to be blocked or not, because the carriers are doing this using their own algorithms, which are entirely proprietary. They don't have to tell you what they're doing or how they're doing it. They don't even have to tell you if your call is being blocked. It's all bad news, but the FCC is really kind of putting the screws on the carriers to make sure that they've got the Traced Act, stir, shaken authentication protocols in place, and also to make sure that they are blocking large quantities of calls that, again, the network users are going to view as unwanted. How do you know if the call is unwanted or not? Well, of course they don't, right? They're just using these algorithms of their own creation. The carriers have tremendous power right now, tremendous power. And they're really, in my view, this is an unconstitutional licensing scheme where the FCC has essentially given the carriers the power to decide on an ad hoc basis, prior restraints on speech. It's all bad, in my opinion. It's all illegal, but it's going on right now. And you know, it's so weird, Arvel, like we talked about at the summit in December. Like a bunch of my clients call me and say, hey, Eric, can you call the carriers? Can you call the aggregators and ask them to turn my calls back on? And I say, sure, and I do, and then they do get turned back on. But it's like, it can't be that like Telecom in this nation turns on whether or not you know the czar, right? Like it just can't, it's completely unsustainable. It's ridiculous, but really that's where the push is right now, is on, you know, what the commission is calling technological solutions to preventing robocalls. But really it's just licensing schemes and it's highly illegal. But the nice thing is, from my perspective, the FCC is less focused on enforcement, you know, kind of coming down on individual actors and more focused on looking at the carrier level. You know, so it's a good news, bad news story there.
One second. We got a couple questions. We got one quick question earlier. Anonymous attendee says, I thought the 3-call limit, which you said earlier, on landlines was indefinitely postponed.
It is. That's true. It is indefinitely postponed until it's not, right? It has to be published in the Federal Registrar before it becomes an enforceable provision. Before that can happen, it has to go through something called the OMB Small Business Review, which is still pending, and I am informed and believe it will take a while for that to all happen. But it is true that if you read TCPA world, once all that takes place, you'll know first. But let's just assume that you don't read TCPA world and maybe you're not going to attend another one of these for a while. Best to just be aligned with the 3-call limitation. But the anonymous questioner, you are correct. It is not binding. today, but it is a rule on the books, and it's just a matter of time before it becomes binding.
Gotcha.
What else you
Thank
got?
you. Thank you. One other question.
Yeah.
Regarding the carriers, the carriers, with the FCC enforcement is causing the carriers to stop calls. Somebody asked about texting. Are the carriers blocking SMS like they are being asked to block voice calls?
Oh, yes. Absolutely. No. So in fact, the carrier's restrictions on text messages are even more robust than they are on calls. There's a big, long history lesson here that I love to give, but in a nutshell, under the Communications Act of 1936, telecommunications cannot be interfered with by the carriers, except that now the FCC is letting them interfere all they want. However, text messages are treated as information services, not as telecommunications under some ruling from 2018. What does that mean? That means that text messages are not subject to the rules that the carriers are supposed to be common carriers and allow all text messages to go through. That means that the carriers kind of have carte blanche to do whatever they want with texting. And as those of you that are using the text channel know, between the 10DLC rollout and the campaign registry rules and the enforcement and enhancement of short code rules recently, I mean, they're really coming down hard on people when it comes to trying to deliver text messages. There are a ton of rules around that. I'm happy to kind of give you best practices and to help you, if you reach out to me, to get your deliverability requirements met by your aggregator friends and ultimately by the carriers. Probably more than we can talk about here today, because there's about, I don't know, 10 hours of content just on that I could go into. All right, what else we got? We're still only on the preliminary slide. How much fun is this?
So just one last follow-up to make sure we can cover this. So if SMS campaigns are approved, which I'm not sure what approved means, then this should not be an issue. That was the same person's follow-up.
Yeah, well, isn't that beautiful? What does approved mean? So you can get approved by the aggregator, right? That's going to be the portal that you're using to connect with the carriers. That should help you. I mean, if the aggregator is giving you approval, I mean, that's great. But as we all know, that's only great until the carrier says otherwise, right? This is the way it works, just so you guys know, in this world, right? The aggregator will shut you down. You'll go to the aggregator and they'll say, hey, you'll say, why did you shut me down? And the aggregator will say, oh, well, the carrier made me do it. So then I'll call the carrier and I'll say, whoever, why'd you shut them down? And they'll say, oh, no, that wasn't us. That's the aggregator did that, right? So they point at each other and then magically the traffic goes through again. It's all kind of like a big game these days. Like I said, it's unsustainable. There's going to be standards put into place at some point, but right now, deliverability is just a wild, wild west. Okay, so let's keep moving. Lots to cover.
Yep.
So let's see. The bad guys are still manufacturing lawsuits. Yeah, it's a problem. I'm somewhat convinced that they're being helped at this point by folks in the lead ecosystem. Come see me at LeadsCon. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Let's move quickly. Sorry, I just want to get through some of the substantive content. Citibank just got really crushed in a wrong number class action. Anyone that's listening to me that is in the servicing space, not marketing, servicing. The Citibank case called Head versus Citibank is a servicing case. These are folks that are calling to collect debt. In that case, it was on a credit card. And they got hammered because they were calling wrong numbers. Obviously, they weren't calling wrong numbers on purpose. Understand, this was accidental. But the TCPA is a strict liability statute. It does not matter if you are trying to call wrong numbers or not. If you're using pre-recorded calls to call a wrong number, you are violating the statute. It's $500 per call. And in that case, the court certified a 7-year class of wrong number pre-recorded calls. I've talked to the plaintiff's counsel off the record. He tells me there's probably 3 million. I guess it's on the record now. Probably up to maybe 3 million of these calls. Now, I don't know that. That's not in the public record. Maybe that's not true, right? I don't know. But you're talking about at least, in the public records, at least 1 million calls. 1 million calls. I mean, think about how much that is at issue. Between $500 million and $1.5 billion on a single certification ruling. I mean, that is an incredible, just drop of a gavel. You're talking about potentially $1 billion in exposure. Very few institutions, and Citibank's a very well-funded large institution. I don't even think it can sustain a $1 billion hit on its net worth. I mean, this is just incredible. The statute is incredible. And so you have to avoid wrong number calling. You have to use the recycled number database that the FCC has available to you. You have to consider using other vendor solutions like Infutor, which I understand was just obtained by Verisk, and like LexisNexis. There's lots of other resources out there to help you to avoid calling wrong numbers. But at the end of the day, your policies and your practices are it's just critical that you have these things buttoned down and that you know what you're doing with your data, because so often these things are data driven. Lead fraud, dark patterns. Hopefully you folks know what this is. Those of you that are buying leads, ingesting leads to make outbound direct to consumer calls, understand that lead fraud is an issue right now for you. It is, Rich Kahn over at Anura tells me that between 20 and 50%, depending on the channel, of leads are not valid. They're bogus. They're fake. You are paying for something that is not real. A consumer's information is being sold to you without their consent, and you're making phone calls on these leads without consent. And guess what? That is your risk, because that lead provider, right? The way this works, you guys know this if you're in the ecosystem, right? You want to buy leads, you contract with so-and-so, and you say, I really only want consented leads. And they say, no problem, they're going to be consented. And then what happens? You get a claim, and then you go to the lead source and you say, what happened? And they say, oh, well, I was working with an affiliate and they were a new affiliate and I only bought from them for 2 weeks and I shut them down right away. Well, guess what? Now you're stuck with the class action. It is absolutely critical that you as a lead buyer make sure that you know who you're doing business with. And if you get one of these deals where they give you a fake lead or something, that you suspect is a fake lead or turns out to be a fake lead, that you make them pay for it, right? The ecosystem is dirty right now. And you as a lead buyer, you own the risk and you also own the responsibility that you shut these folks down immediately if you get sold a fake lead. Dark patterns, we're going to talk about that here in a second. I think it's better for me to show you that rather than to talk to you about it. So we get into the slides here. Should you use the reassigned number database? Yes, you should. Now, one thing to keep in mind about that database, it is pretty expensive, but it's important because what it will tell you, of course, is whether or not a phone number has been reassigned since the last time you talked to the customer on that number. Why is that important? For the same reason we just talked about. If you call a wrong number, you are strictly liable for that call. That's $500 minimum. Class actions are enabled, as we know, and as you should know. If you're buying aged leads or you're again servicing, if you are calling, someone goes into debt, they go into default on their loan today. Well, they might have had a mortgage or had a credit card for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, right before they ever went to default. The phone number you have on that account might be 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years old. And now you're calling it. Now you think, hey, look, I've got consent, right? It's my customer. I'm calling my customer on a phone number that they gave me. That's consent. Well, that is consent unless the phone number's changed hands, and then it's not consent anymore. And that's the whole reason why the reassigned number database exists. It's because there's no resource that tells you whether or not a phone number changes hands. The customer doesn't have to tell you that. Even if the consumer agreement that you have with them says that they should tell you, they're not going to tell you. The phone number changes hands, right? You've got no resource that is definitive except for the recycled number database. Now the problem is, as Arvel will tell you, the database only has data to October of last year, potentially going back to February of last year, but it's kind of hit and miss. So if you want to know if a phone number's changed hands and you got that phone number before February, really before October of last year, or if that aged lead came in before October or February of last year, what are you going to do? Arvel, what are they going to do? They're going to call
us.
Arvel. Yeah, because DNC.com has data. Again, I don't endorse anybody, but DNC.com is my friend and they're good guys. They've got data going back before February of 2021. So that's nice. But it is expensive, but you do have to use this, because if you don't use this, guess what? You get sued in a wrong number class action. What's the first question you get asked? Did you use the recycled number database? What's the second question you get asked if the answer is no? Well, why not? What's your answer going to be? Oh, it was too expensive. Oh, we didn't know about it. Oh, the data wasn't good enough for us. Like, there's no answer to that question, folks. That's going to look okay to a judge and a jury. Whether you like it or not, if you're calling aged leads, if you're working a servicing portfolio, using the R&D is now a cost of doing business. I'm sorry, it just is. Should you invest in one of these human selection dialers? Arvel, can we do that poll I want to do a poll to see how many folks are already using human selection dialers, how many folks are still using click to dial, or how many folks after Facebook at this point feel pretty good about using predictive dialers. So here's the question. After Facebook, is it more likely for you that you're going to start moving to predictive dialers for your unconsented calls? Are you going to continue to use your click to dial systems for your unconsented calls? Or are you moving towards human selection systems now for your unconsented calls? Go ahead and give me your answer. I'm really curious. Like, I want to know what people are doing out there. I know anecdotally what my clients are doing, but I don't know what everybody's doing. So if you'd be kind enough to answer this. Do we got answers, Arvel? How are we doing? We've got 239 participants. Oh God, Pooja, you cracked me up. Is this privileged? It's not privileged, but it is anonymized. No one's going to know who you are. Great question, by the way. And good to see you, Pooja. Congratulations on your new gig, by the way. Okay, so I don't know if we have an answer or not. We've got 239 people watching this right now, which is amazing, by the way. It's great. So hopefully we have like 238 people respond to the poll. What do we think? I'm kidding. Arvel, or we've got to keep moving. So do we have our answer?
We do not have an answer yet, but we'll come back to you when we have.
Okay, come back to me.
Yep.
All right, so we'll put this aside. So the question is, should we invest in one of these human selection systems? I made you answer the poll first. Look, my answer is yes. And when we get to the Facebook slides here, assuming that we do, you're going to find out why. That the courts are splitting on whether or not the use of a random or sequential number generator to generate phone numbers is necessary, in which case none of you are using an ATDS, right? Or if the use of an ROSNG to generate any number in connection with the sequencing of phone numbers to be dialed, or in connection with the storage of phone numbers to be dialed, constitutes the use of an ATDS. If so, then guess what? Probably most of you are using an ATDS, including your click to dial system. Ooh, why? Because virtually all of these systems use a randomizer or a number generator for some process associated with the dialing function. That's how these things work. I'm happy to talk to you about that and kind of dive in deeper into a source code review, which is what we do all the time here. But the truth is, don't let these early positive returns on the MSJs that you're seeing out there post Facebook fool you into thinking that, hey, look, if I'm using a click to dial, I'm safe. That's not true. Or if I'm using a predictive dialer, I'm safe. That is not true post Facebook. Folks, it's just not true. What matters is, one, how a court views the definition of ROSNG in connection with storing and producing phone numbers, okay? Storing phone numbers, producing phone numbers. What's the court's philosophy on that? And second, what is the source code functionality of your dialer in light of that? I'm going to tell you, a lot of people have been very surprised by what they've found. All right. The human selection system, of course, takes all the guesswork out because it uses a human being to determine the sequence of dial, and there's no opportunity. Oh, this is great. 109 responses. Good job, guys. I mean, I love this. See, this is why I love the TCPA world. You guys are like really engaged. Like, can you imagine this? How many lawyers out there have a webinar where they do a poll and they get a 50% response rate? That's amazing. I love you people. I really, truly, I do. All right, so look at this. 40% are moving toward human selection. I think that's a smart group. 18% are moving toward more predictive dialer. I love you people, right? You're aggressive. I like the aggressiveness. I'm not mad at you for being aggressive. Understand though, if you're moving toward predictive dialing, you are moving into the teeth of the beast, Hopefully you're my clients and you're going to retain me to defend you in the lawsuits that are going to come. These are my favorite kinds of clients. I'm kidding. Actually, my favorite kinds of clients are the ones that are conservative, that heed advice, and that don't get themselves into more trouble. And it's nice to see. So about 40% of you are continuing to use click to dial. And I mean, truthfully, the way I look at it, there's always going to be the folks that are aggressive, 20%. And this kind of breaks down the way I think it would, right? Aggressive, maybe that's 20% of the population. Folks that are conservative, but like, hey, look, I'm going to adopt a moderate amount of risk, right? That's going to be about 40%. Those are the folks that are continuing to use click to dial. And then there's the folks that say, hey, look, I'm going to do this right. I don't want risk. I know that the environment is, such that human selection is the future in light of the TCPA post Facebook. So that's where I'm moving. And I see 40% there. So probably what I would have expected, but really nice to get this snapshot. Thanks, everybody. Okay. So 2 last things. ESIGN requirements. Oh my God. this Mantha case, you guys, from January. Hopefully, those of you that were at Lead Generation World heard me talk about it. Those of you that were not, hopefully you're reading TCPA World, free, no barriers, get it, you don't have to register. But hopefully you know about this case. A magistrate judge in Massachusetts held, this is wild, that an online disclosure is not valid, period, even if it's otherwise perfectly enforceable, unless the consumer has separately given you consent to do business electronically under the ESIGN Act. Nuts. So not just one disclosure, you have to, before you can get the consent disclosure, you also have to get them to agree in a formal, conspicuous, separately signed agreement, right? Full bells and whistles, not like little font down at the bottom, part of the privacy policy terms and conditions. No, separate agreement, ESIGN Act, I agree to do business with you electronically. Then and only then can you get a separate now written consent document that is valid. Luckily, that is just one magistrate judge in Massachusetts. I'm telling you, that is a wrongly decided case. The court did not properly, I think, interpret the regulations and the declaratory rulings from the FCC. Look at my article on TCPA World, I'll explain why. But it's not the magistrate judge's fault. The lawyers didn't do their job, in my opinion. And this is what happens. Bad facts make bad law. Bad lawyering makes bad law. Again, that's why I started TCPA World, so that defense lawyers could have a place to go and learn about the law too, so that we don't have rulings like this. Anyway, really bad ruling, one off hopefully. And if you see that ruling, or excuse me, that argument being made in one of your cases, call me, I will help you. I'll do it for free because this is really bad. All right, last question. Is the TCPA constitutional? Absolutely not. Couple of things that are developments here. One, the Creasy argument, hopefully you all know Creasy, that is essentially saying that the TCPA is not enforceable before July 6th, 2020. That was the date that the Supreme Court handed down the AAPC decision. You might remember there the Supreme Court held that the government-backed debt exemption as a content-specific exemption to a content-neutral restriction on speech did not survive strict scrutiny, and as a result, the TCPA was unconstitutional, but the Supreme Court, in its wisdom and glory, decided to save the TCPA by severing the exemption. Now, here's the question. Did that severance save the TCPA going backward in time or only forward in time? If only forward in time, then of course, anyone that's getting sued for calls that were made before July 6, 2020 cannot be sued. And that was the finding in a case called Creasy. Creasy is the minority position, but that position right now is on appeal to the Supreme Court again. And March 18th, was that like Friday? The Supreme Court is going to meet. All 9 justices are going to have a discussion about it and decide, are we going to take this case a second time or not? So keep an eye on that. In the meantime, though, the TCPA remains unconstitutional because there are currently, right now, today, content-specific exemptions that exist within the TCPA, just like the government-backed debt exemption. But there's not just one, there's like 8 of them. So even today, the TCPA is likely unconstitutional. Just like we brought you that great ruling on concrete harm in state court, my firm, Eric Troutman, the czar, is putting together, I think, the definitive briefing on why it is that the TCPA is not constitutional today. So we'll let you know how that briefing and those arguments go. All right, other questions before we actually get to the content?
Yes, sir. You can take a pause right quick and I will read some of these questions. We have a couple of questions on the reassigned number database, which got people's attention. And so there's a couple here. I will mention, as you mentioned, that we do DNC.com. We do have solutions to scrub your data for the reassigned number database. But one of the questions was, number one, can you explain it? Like, can you just give a little more detail about the safe harbor, about what exactly it is and what's required for that?
Sure. So as I've already laid out, if you're calling age leads or calling people for servicing where the phone number came, or back in time, you don't know today if that phone number still belongs to the person that gave you consent, right? That's a problem. The number might have been reassigned. So the FCC has what's called the reassigned number or recycled number database. What the database is a list of, well, it's actually the way to explain it is the carrier has to give data every time a phone number changes hands. It's just a yes or a no, right? And it gives a date. The carrier gives a date to the administrator of the database that the phone number changes hands. So what you need to know in order to take advantage of the database is the number that you want to scrub and the date, the last good date, the last time you know for a fact that phone number belonged to your customer. For some people, that's like, yesterday, because I just talked to them. For some people, it's, well, I haven't talked to them in 6 years and they gave it to me 6 years ago. So only data I have is 6 years ago. Okay. So to use the database, you have to have all the phone numbers that you want to call and the date that you think is the last good date for that phone number. And you take that and you give it to the administrator, and the administrator comes back to you with a really, really helpful piece of information. It's just a yes or a no. Okay. And in this context, a yes is bad. A yes means the phone number has changed hands. Remember, the carrier has given a reassigned number date, right? And that date is later than the date that you've given the administrator. Okay. The fact that the date is later means that the number has changed hands since the last time you had the number that was valid for your customer and that you talked to your customer on that number. Okay. So the administrator comes back with a yes, meaning that the phone number has changed hands, meaning that you cannot call that phone number. Or the carrier or the administrator comes back with a no, which says the phone number has not changed hands since the date that you gave the administrator. And that means that you can call the phone number. Okay. Yes or no. Now, obviously, there's challenges to operationalizing this, right? One, you have to have all your last good numbers. You have to have all the cell phone numbers you want to call before you call. That's kind of a pain. Okay. Then you have to be able to operationalize a yes and a no in a way that is like really bulletproof, because trust me, folks, you do not want to be calling the yeses. Believe me, that is the first thing that the plaintiff's lawyers are going to be looking for when they sue you. Can you go ahead and produce all the calls that you made after you received the yes from the administrator? Yeah, that's a class, and that is not what you want to be doing. Okay, so you have to have bulletproof operationalization. Geez, are you a lawyer, Troutman? Can you talk? You have to be bulletproof in operationalizing your response to what the administrator is doing. Okay, but that's only 2 issues. The third issue is what I was talking about earlier is data, right? What happens if your date is January 2021? Well, guess what? Guess what you're going to get back from the administrator? This is really helpful. No data. Well, if you get back a no data, that does not help you at all, because it doesn't tell you the numbers changed hands or not changed hands, right? So to your point, Arvell, safe harbor, if you call a phone number where the administrator comes back with a no, not a no data, a no, you have a safe harbor, meaning you can call that number. And if it turns out that the carriers didn't report properly or the administrator didn't report to you properly, you're fine. You're safe. You are not liable for that call. However, that's a very limited safe harbor. It is not a good faith safe harbor. It's very limited. You are only protected if the carrier messed up or the administrator messed up. You're not protected if you mess up, right? You intended to send the phone number, but you sent the wrong number. You intended to send the date, but you sent the wrong date. You intended to obey the yes or no, but you did it wrong, right? No safe harbor. So you got to be really, really careful with this. Like I said before, it is a cost of doing business. You have to do it, but you have to do it right. Like so many other things in TCPA world, if you do it wrong, it doesn't matter that you were trying to do something to help the consumer. The court will hammer you for it. And we've seen this many, many times in the TCPA world where the plaintiff's lawyers are using your own data against you, your own policies against you. You're trying hard to do the right thing, and you just kind of, you have a boo-boo, you stub your toe on something, and you get hammered. Okay, the TCPA, this is why I've dedicated my career to this, folks. This is why so many people follow TCPA world. It's why I have over 100 clients. It's because it is the highest exposure statute, and there is just absolutely no grace, right? There's no good faith defense on this part of the statute. There is in a different part of the statute, but here it's strict liability. So you have to get it right. You have to have good counsel, and you have to have good folks inside your company that are deploying the right strategies to make sure that that counsel is heeded. What else you got, Arvell?
Gotcha. I guess one other question on that topic. Somebody just, Lisa asked, have you found that the Neustar scrubs for reassigned numbers are sufficient?
No,
just one.
I've not found that. Now, look, I'm not hating on Neustar. I'm not hating on anybody. These are all partial solutions, right? They'll tell you they're partial solutions. None of these are 100%. If anyone ever tells you they're 100%, they're lying. They're lying to you. They are, but they're not going to tell you that because they know better. So, I encourage you to use belt and suspenders. I encourage you to use the private solutions like Newstar, but also use the federal government solution. You have to use a federal government solution. You just have to. Again, plaintiff's lawyer asks you, why didn't you use Newstar? I don't know. They're not 100%. They're expensive and they're private and I don't trust them. That's a fine answer if that's the truth. Why didn't you use the federal government's reassigned number database? I just didn't want to. I mean, there's no good answer to that, guys. There's just not. You have to do it, whether you like it or not. You have to.
Okay. Yeah. Well, for the other questions, we may answer them separately. We may follow up after, but we want to go through some more slides. So it's
sure. So I've got 55 slides, about 4 hours of content in 20 minutes. No problem.
Yeah.
All right, let's go. Next slide. All right, tell you what. Why don't I just give you the 5 takeaways so you don't have to sit through the slides because we're not going to get through them anyway. All right.
There you go.
Here are your takeaways. TCPA lives on post Facebook. Hopefully all of you know that, right? Facebook was a big Supreme Court ruling. It was a big deal. But all it essentially held is that you have to have a random or sequential number generator in your system doing something. Problem is, the Supreme Court did not answer what that something is. And there are now 40 cases coming to different conclusions as to what that ROSNG can and must be doing in your system. And as I told you earlier, every single one of you is using a randomizer and a number generator for some process in connection with your dialing and with your campaign creation. I know this because I've looked at all of the systems, okay? That stuff is there. So again, if you're calling numbers that are not consented and you know it, you have to have a source code review. You really have to dive deep and you can't trust any of these out of the box solutions. Okay, so that's on the ATDS front, but understand that that is just one tiny piece, right, of the TCPA. And that is frankly where the sharks, right? I did the power rankings for the TCPA lawyers. If you haven't looked at this, it's kind of funny, huge traffic on TCPA World, power rankings, who are the top 10 plaintiffs lawyers, okay? Those are the arguments that the top 10 plaintiffs lawyers are making. But even like the clowns, right? The lower hanging, that's not right. You know what I'm saying? Like I was gonna say bottom feeders. I don't want to be mean, but you guys know what I mean. There's like the really top drawer lawyers, and then there's the other guys, right? Even the other guys are bringing huge volumes of TCPA cases post Facebook because pre-recorded calling continues. If you're making pre-recorded calls, ringless voicemail, IVR, voicemails, any of that stuff, that is a pre-recorded call. And you have to have express written consent, again, to call cell phone for marketing purposes and express consent to call cell phone for servicing purposes. And of course, that is where we talk about recycled numbers and where it becomes so problematic. Huge volumes of pre-recorded calls. Again, we're up 30% year over year in these filings, okay? So the TCPA remains as dangerous as ever before. Now, I know that this was originally going to be a presentation geared to lead suppliers, lead buyers. I know I've got a lot of buyers on the line, a lot of sellers on the line. So these are the 5 big risks that you should keep in mind for if you're in that industry, right? The Mantha case, we talked about Mantha, right? ESIGN requirements. I'm not going so far as to tell my clients they have to have a separate ESIGN agreement because I don't think that is the right law. I do not believe that that case was correctly decided, and I don't believe that people should be acting on that as if it is. That being said, that is a new risk that is now out there, and it's a problem, okay? But web format being insufficient, I mean, you know what? You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna break from being linear. I wanna show you folks something. I'm gonna preview this for you. Pooja and Angela and some others are gonna be at LeadsCon with me in a 2.5 hour segment at LeadsCon, breaking this stuff down. You guys should think about being there if you're not already registered. Ben, can we slide forward? I'm gonna go all the way forward to the slides where I've got the pictures of the websites. I'm gonna show folks this real quick. I think it's really important. Okay, these are the top 10 commandments. Go back for a second. Sorry, look at me, I'm a mess today. Right here. So this is another slide, guys. It's my gift to you. Like, screenshot this. These are the 10 commandments of telecom law. If you don't know these 10 commandments, you don't have in-house counsel that's helping you with these, you got to know these. The asterisks are the ones that are for marketing only. The rest of them apply to marketing and to servicing or to informational calling. Super important stuff, guys. I've been handing these out for free to everybody because I'm like just shocked by how many of these folks don't know. And this is federal law, like private right of action for all of this. So, you know, don't mess this up. Okay, so let's go forward. I want to show folks these slides, and I'm sorry that we're so discombobulated today. Again, I'm very linear, but I just wanted to make sure that I give the people what they want, right? That's what I was trying to do today. So we got a little off track. Okay, keep going. Next one. Okay, I'm keep going. A couple more. These are all unenforceable. Hopefully you're seeing this. Okay, this is the one I want to show you. This is new. This is all new content. Pay attention. First time ever I'm airing this. This is from a website. I'm not going to name the website. Very popular website in the mortgage vertical. Okay, look at this thing. United States mortgage professionals help give U.S. homeowners access to more affordable mortgages. That scares me right out of the gate, almost suggesting that this company has nothing to do with the United States government, is somehow being backed by the U.S. government. I don't like that. That's tricky, right? Regulators hate that stuff, but I'm not too concerned about that. But look at this. Okay, 50%. See this 50%? Remember that 50%. Two little questions. Single family, select one. Credit type, select one. Man, that's pretty easy. I'm feeling pretty good as a consumer. I'm 50% of the way done. I've answered two questions. I feel good. All right, press to continue. Go to the next slide. What happens? All right, I'm on the next slide. Now I'm 75% of the way done. Wait a minute. Okay. That math doesn't add up, but that's okay. So now we're 75% of the way done. We answer some questions. Okay, that's fine. Go to the next slide. Now we get down to the bottom. Okay, down to the bottom. The little green thing says what? It says calculate. Okay. Okay, so now you feel pretty good. You're gonna hit this calculate button and something's going to be calculated, right? Okay, push the button. Next slide, what happens? Okay, more questions. Now I'm at 90%. So I went from 50% done to 75% done to 90% done. Now I got a bunch more questions. Okay, answer the questions, go down to the next slide. Okay, so now you get to the bottom. Here you go. Here's my address, fake address, email address. Now it says calculate again. Okay, I was at 90%, so now I hit calculate. Now something's really gonna happen, right? Okay, press calculate. Let's see what happens. Oh my God, now I'm 99% done.
So close, so close.
So close, yeah, so far away, all right? So now I have to answer some more questions. Okay, so I'm answering these questions. Go to the next slide. So now I finally get to the bottom. Here's my phone number. Okay, I provide my phone number. Little tiny content. Can you read that? I can barely read that. Enter your phone number above to receive automated and pre-recorded calls from us and the providers that are matched to you. Doesn't say about what. Doesn't say that if you, it's not a condition of good or service, like you have to. It's missing like 4 of the Troutman 9. This is what I want to show you. Watch what happens here. Calculate your free result. Okay, we all agree. When you push this button, something better calculate, right? Push the button. Let's see what happens. Next slide. You've completed the first step to finding the lowest rates in Villa Park, California. Click the loan option below that interests you to get started. Look at this button down there, get started. So as a consumer, I was just duped at the outset into thinking that maybe this has something to do with the federal government, which it doesn't. I was duped at the outset that there was gonna be 2 plates that I had to respond to, ended up being 5. I was duped into thinking that I was going to get calculations of something repeatedly, which I never did, even at the end, even after I sat through this entire enormous thing. And I omitted like half the questions. I got nothing but an ad for Quicken. What the hell? And if you go back and you look at the bottom, go back one slide, and you actually like look and zoom in here at the bottom of these things, they're actually, this is a multi-vertical lead site. They're not just selling this to mortgage lenders, because of course what happens is this phone number gets sold and then you, mortgage buyer, buy it and then start calling this consumer, okay? So for all the reasons I just gave you, this is not a valid lead. Eric Troutman's opinion, not valid. And that's for a mortgage loan. They're gonna sell this to folks that offer debt relief services. They're gonna sell this to folks that offer other related services like insurance, and they're going to try to sell that as a valid lead and say that the consumer gave consent. Folks, this is why you're getting sued. This is why there's so many class action lawsuits out there, because people are buying junk like this, okay? Now, let's go all the way back to my original slide, right? The big risks, when I'm talking about the five takeaway slide, let's go all the way back to that. So when I'm talking about risks to lead buyers, I'm talking about lead fraud, right? That's true lead fraud, right? The person giving you the lead has just taken information that they bought off the dark web somewhere, and they're just using a bot to populate a form, okay? That's lead fraud. Obviously, that's terrible. But even dark patterns, right? It's called what I just showed you is called a dark pattern. That's like where the consumer is believing one thing, and then they're tricked and duped and led and strung along in a bait and switch, and they're given, something different. okay? The courts, I'm going to tell you, you think I have a bad temperament when it comes to this stuff? The courts hate this stuff. They hate this stuff. And the reason I'm so fired up about it is because when I have to stand up in federal court and defend my clients who are always buyers, right? I don't, generally speaking, I do not defend or represent the lead seller. I represent the person buying the loan, buying the lead, who's made the outbound call. I have to stand up in federal court and say, yes, Your Honor, it was okay for my client to make this phone call because the plaintiff supplied their information on this god-awful website. And then, that I'm a fairly well-known guy in federal court. The judges know me, the plaintiff's bar knows me, everybody kind of knows me now. That hurts my credibility. It really makes me angry, right? So I want to see this whole thing cleaned up because I know my clients want valid leads. They want to buy valid leads. You know what? I'm thinking about starting a trade organization, Arvel. I'm going to tell you. I'm really thinking about getting the buyers together and putting forth standards and saying, we're not going to buy a lead unless it meets these standards. I'm thinking about doing that. But for now, I'm going to talk about it every chance I get. Okay. So last one here is minors giving consent. Those of you that collect data regarding age, just keep in mind that in many jurisdictions, the plaintiff's bar is now arguing that that consumer is under 18 years of age. They cannot give consent, right? It's statutory rape of a cell phone is what this is, right?
Ouch.
If their consent is not valid, they're underage, so it's not real consent. So you can't call their cell phone. And this argument is gaining traction, okay? So keep that in mind. All right, other risks. I can't believe we're not even really gonna get to all my cool slides on Facebook. Guys, check out tcpaworld.com, the Facebook ruling resource page. It's right there up top in the little home bar, Facebook ruling resource page. I break down every single case that's been decided post Facebook. You can see all my graphics and all my my highlights that kind of explain what Facebook does and how you can leverage it and what technology is safe and not safe. But the bottom line is people that are buying leads, folks that are I haven't talked about Florida yet, moving towards human selection, right? Human selection is the systems that are using human beings, not just to click a button, right, like a chicken, but to actually make the selection. And that takes away the RSNG's potential utilization as part of the sequencing of phone numbers, which again, philosophically, some courts are viewing as the hallmark of Facebook. Again, there's a dispute there, but why not be on the safer side? Just in case anyone doesn't know, again, covering this on TCPA World, Florida, right? The Florida Telephone Solicitation Act. Hopefully you all know this. There is no established business relationship down there. None. You cannot call your own customer using essentially anything because the definition of auto dialer in Florida is so extremely broad. Again, literally only the human selection systems pretty much are the things that you can use down there. And there's really robust rules in terms of only 3 contacts per 24 hours, limited hours of calling for marketing. This is all marketing, okay? Servicing doesn't apply to you. But we worked hard, a lot of other folks worked hard to do some lobbying down in Florida. The Florida Senate had a good bill that was going to be retroactive and close up some of the loopholes in this horrible, horrible statute down there in Florida. The plaintiff's bar came to bat in the House. The 2 chambers couldn't get it together, no amendment. And so what happens? The Florida mini TCPA, this horrible bill with a private right of action, same as the TCPA, but with an even broader auto dialer definition and with no established business relationship defense. And again, understand, even on the TCPA, the EVR defense only applies to DNC claims. It does not apply to regulated technology claims. Call me if you've got a question about that. But that entire defense does not exist in Florida. It is a terrible situation. Dozens and dozens and hundreds of cases have been filed down there. And it's not just against Florida companies. Understand that courts have jurisdiction if you are calling into Florida. So if you're a California-based company that makes calls into Florida, you can and will, and many have been sued down there. So just keep that in mind. And of course, those of you following TCPA World, you already know this. Oklahoma, the Oklahoma House passed yesterday, 91-1, real thoughtful there, guys, 91-1, passed a bill mimicking and copying the tragically flawed Florida bill. And so now Oklahoma is one step away from having its own mini TCPA. Washington State also considering a bill to copycat the Florida bill. Georgia considering a bill to copycat the Florida bill. Folks, it is spreading. It's spreading. It's going to be all across the country. Again, early adopters on human selection, I think, are kind of chuckling, saying, yeah, well, we knew. But it's really something that's a risk to everybody. So wrong number TCPA class actions. I talked about this earlier. I'll say it again because poor Citibank. It is the single biggest risk to most companies. I mean, period. I'm not just talking about like litigation risk. I mean, it's the single biggest risk to a company that makes large amounts of outbound calls. There's like, I'm not talking about competition. I'm not talking about inflation. I mean, heck, even this thing in Ukraine, which could become World War III, maybe that's bigger. But like outside of major geopolitical events, your biggest risk is the TCPA. Because if you make outbound calls to wrong numbers at volume, again, that's $500 per, no cap, no limits, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, looking back 4, 5, 6, even 7 years, depending on the content and context. Huge. So again, make sure now is the time right now, today, leave this webinar once it ends and go and say, okay, let me look at my policies and make sure I've got good policies. I know what I'm doing with my data. Call Troutman and make sure that he tells me what I should be doing, because as you know, number 5, this is a thing that you always have to keep in mind. It's not just your company that's facing this liability. It's you, right? That was pretty cool. You. Personal liability is available under the TCPA. This is the worst thing on earth, in my opinion, right? So you're somebody, right, that's in the compliance shop, or you're a CEO of a smaller company, or you're a campaign manager, or you're a dialer manager, or you're, God bless you, agent that makes outbound calls and sits at their computer all day. You can be personally sued if the calls that you are a part of violate the statute. Personally sued. So we're not just talking about $100 million against your company. We're talking about $100 million against little old you for your personal car and your house and your bank account. It's disgusting. It is the worst thing in the world. And anytime I see a plaintiff's lawyer name a VP of a company or some poor schmuck that was doing the campaigns, I mean, that's just Bush League. And like, they don't do that to my clients because I'll figuratively punch them in the nose, figuratively. But this happens. It's gruesome when it does. So just again, TCPA compliance, absolutely critical to the institution, and it's critical to the individuals that are kind of in the line of sight, right, that are involved in these campaigns. All right, Arvell, I've got 3 minutes left for questions. We went through like none of my slides, but this was fun. I had a good time. Hopefully everyone had a good time. So what other questions we got?
Yeah, I'll try to get through these quickly. I'll give you some short and sweet ones.
Let's go. Popcorn.
Carrie asks, is there personal liability to in-house counsel?
Oh, that's a great question. There is zero case law addressing that issue. My personal view is that in-house counsel cannot be held liable because they are counsel. But what I tell folks is don't take a chance. Get it to outside counsel, right? Make me run that risk. I dare someone to sue Eric Troutman and say, he's liable for his client engaging in some, I dare someone to do that, right? That push that risk outside. You don't want to carry that risk, but most importantly, if you are in-house counsel, what you really have to be thinking about is like, you're probably not going to get sued, truthfully. But if you've got a business lead, right, a business stakeholder that's trying to push an initiative and you're giving advice around that, like you got to tell them, like, hey, lady or guy, I know you're really hot on this and I want to be a supporter, right? I'm a team player, I'm on your team, but just understand if this goes the wrong way, you personally could be sued, not just the company, you, right? And I've seen this work. I mean, it's not like a tactic to try to get them to come around. I mean, but you kind of owe the responsibility, right? As their lawyer. I mean, you're a lawyer for the company, not for that individual, but you should be telling that guy or gal, if you do this and it goes the wrong way, you could be on the caption, folks. So, that's why I look at it, but always push that. If you've got a question, you've got a new outreach that you want to do and you're not sure if you can do it or not, or it should be blessed, get somebody else to bless it. It doesn't have to be me, right? Get outside counsel to bless it. Then, whose decision was this? There's nobody. It's outside counsel, right? Go sue Squire Patton Boggs. They're not going to do that. What else, Arvell?
There's a lot. Let's see.
Just call me, guys. I'm easy to find. I mean, yeah. I'm happy to give you some free stuff, but keep going, Arvell. We can get a couple more. I'm fine going over a couple minutes.
Yeah, we'll go maybe 10 minutes if you guys can. Right. So let's go here. For express written consent, assuming we should use the Florida definition as the gold standard and our sign-up forms, if we are aiming to collect consent across multiple states that we have operations, maybe I'm not catching the question.
Yes, no, I mean, I think it's a great idea. Use the Florida definition of auto dialer as your assumption that that's what is going to be the application across the country. And that is an extremely broad definition. And if that is your mindset, right, then you're a conservative kind of company, and you're definitely going to move toward human selection because that's the neutralizer there. But again, you still do want to make sure that you have that valid consent, because even if you can use human selection, even if you can do that validly, you still want to have good brand reputation, right? So you don't just want to be blasting people that didn't give you valid consent. So still stay away from dark pattern, and of course, still look to neutralize the lead fraud as much as you can.
Gotcha, great. Someone said, how often do we need to check the register? I think that's the reassigned number database.
Good,
like,
every
once
30
a month?
days, every 30 days.
Yeah, that. Let me go to one of the older questions. And it was, because you were talking about the consent. So somebody says, Jernaya opted in and he went through the quote process to receive the quote. We received a demand letter afterward. How can they take this to court with us having
Arvel froze. I'm going to answer this question. Just because you've got a Jernaya doesn't mean that there was actually a live person on that website. Now, the Jernaya is capturing something happening on that website, right? And this is what I'm talking about, lead fraud. Some of these guys in the ecosystem are using bots. They'll even, make it look like it's a real lead, but it's not a real lead. So you'll have a Jernaya, it smells right. And then as you dive in and you get into the operations of it's always an affiliate, right? It's like never like the good lead generator that that you're buddies with. It's always somebody kind of downstream that's using a bot, and then they use their attribution URL, right? So they get paid by the aggregator, and then the aggregator gets paid by the buyer. And by the time you find out that it's fraudulent leads, you're already being sued. So just understand the fact that you have a Jernaya is great. Like you have to have a Jernaya or a trusted form, right? I'm a big active prospect guy. Have your trusted form. But at the end of the day, right, that in and of itself is not going to protect you from lead fraud. You got to have that bot detection or the Anura run-in that Rich Khan's got. It's good system over there. And that's why I'm saying there's so much lead fraud that if you're a buyer, like you really should be thinking, I'm not going to use pre-recorded calls because I can't trust my leads. I'm not going to use an auto dialer. I can't trust my leads. That's just something to think about. To me, that's not where the industry is yet. And that's why I'm saying, like, I really want to do something that's a little bit more formal and maybe take it to the regulators to get blessed from the buyers. I think the lead, the lead generators, have had their time and they just haven't come forth with standards. So I'm getting antsy. That's just me. All right. And see, by the way, folks, this is where the summit, like the 2-day summit, is so valuable, because this is supposed to be an hour. We all know I could go 3.5 hours answering questions right now. At the summit, we can actually do that. It's so much fun. All right. Bye, Tracelyn. Okay, what else we got? Okay. Arvel, just questions. Anything else?
Anything else?
Two more good ones. And
two more questions. Are text messages being considered as pre-recorded messages in some courts?
I love that question. Oh, I love that question. Okay, so text messages are calls subject to the TCPA. However, to date, all the courts are viewing them as voice channel calls, not pre-recorded voice calls, meaning that if you are using an ATDS like Facebook, then you are liable. But if you're not using an ATDS, more like Facebook, then you are not liable. The plaintiff's bar doesn't like that. The plaintiff's bar wants to say that the text messages are pre-recorded calls, because as hopefully you know, as I've said, pre-recorded calls instantly trigger the TCPA when made to a cell phone, regardless of whether or not an ATDS is being used. So if they can convince the court that a text message is a pre-recorded voice, then guess what? Every single text message is subject to the statute and can only be made with express written consent for marketing or express consent for informational purposes. But mercifully, the courts are not buying that, because they look at the word voice, right? Pre-recorded voice, that's what the statute says, pre-recorded voice. And the court says a text is not a voice. Sure, it's pre-recorded content of information that's to be conveyed, but it's not a voice. The voice involves this thing called the larynx, right in your throat. It's like in here someplace. I don't really know where it is. I'm a lawyer, man, not a doctor. But anyway, you see my point. So the courts have rejected that argument, but the plaintiff's bar continues to make that argument. So Again, TCPA world, check it out. We cover these arguments as they're made. We cover the case law as it comes down. And if a case comes down that says that text message is a voice, oh, I'm going to make a big deal about that. You're going to hear about it. But I don't think that's very likely. I think you're okay. In fact, I say that the text outside of Florida, text messages is your safest channel post Facebook, because Facebook was a text case, and courts are not very sophisticated sometimes. And they go, Facebook applies to text messages. You are sending a text message. Therefore, the TCPA does not apply to you. Great analysis. But like, some courts do that. So texts are safer right now than voice calls outside of Florida. In Florida, like 92% of the lawsuits being brought under the FTSA, that's the Florida mini TCPA, are text cases. One more question, Arbel. One, make it a good one.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot. Well, here's a simple one, but it may be good. A quick definition of human selection system. What actually is human selection?
So human selection system is any system where a human being is determining the sequence in which numbers are to be dialed and stored. Okay, that's the definition. Safe Select by Customer Dynamics, they're a good company. I helped them design their system. I think they're in the lead in terms of market share in human selection right now. I don't know, maybe somebody else is. But you know, their system, I mean, it's kind of, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of gimmicky, right? You just have like a person like selecting the phone number to be dialed. It can, you know, it operates pretty quick. But the key is, right, with the old, you know, like the old Livebox HCI, right? That used to be the gold standard before Facebook. Now courts are saying that might be an ATDS. Why? Well, because HCI just has phone numbers scrolling and a human being going as fast as they possibly can, right? So now the issue is, what's the sequence? How's that sequence of numbers being scrolled down being determined by the system, right? If there is any form of an ROSNG running anywhere in that dialing platform or in the campaign creation software that might be being used to determine the sequence, or more importantly, and more likely, remember, because that word capacity, the capacity is what you're looking at. That includes latent capacity, and that includes, which is what we see all the time, tie breaking, right? Because nobody randomly selects numbers to go into your campaign, right? Everyone's got business rules. Everyone's got prioritization settings. You know, many people use first in, first out, last in, first out, right? So there, you know, people are like, we don't use a randomizer, Eric, to do this. And I say, I know, right? Nobody does that. But the issue is that, guess what? Machines are dumb. Machines are very dumb. Humans are dumb. I don't know if that's true, but machines are definitely dumb. They only do what they're programmed to do. And machines know that there's going to be ties sometimes, even if there's never really a tie. In real life, the machine thinks there's going to be a tie. The programmer that put the machine together thinks there might be a tie, and they program a tie breaker into the system so that there's not a bug, there's not an error message if the prioritization settings ever align perfectly, right? So that randomizer is there. That number generator is there in the dialing program to determine sequence in the event of a tie when you're pulling numbers out and creating your campaign file, all right? So even if that never, ever, ever, ever gets used in real life, because that word capacity is in there, the fact that that tiebreaker exists means that you're literally using a randomizer to determine the sequence of numbers under Facebook footnote 7 that is, at least in some courts' minds, not all courts, in some courts' minds, that is using an ROSNG to store telephone numbers to be dialed. And that is the hallmark of an ATDS usage. And I'm out of time, folks. Thank you all so much. I love you guys. I will see you in Vegas tomorrow for CCE, in Vegas again next week for LeadsCon, back here April 1st for Facebook webinar, and in Huntington Beach in July. You guys are all great. I got to go. Bye, friends.
Okay. Thank you. There. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Again, we'll send you the replay tomorrow. We will follow up as much as we can to all the questions that we did not get answered. Feel free to sign up for the summit. You can see on the screen. And we do have another webinar on April 1st, specifically talking about the Florida mini TCPA. It's the 1-year anniversary of Florida. So make sure you go to dnc.com/webinars to sign up for that. And again, we look forward to seeing you in person at our California summit in July in Huntington Beach. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good afternoon.